The end of the world didn't start with an explosion. It didn't start with a bang, or a whimper, or zombies clawing at the gates. It started with a sound that every American knows in their bones. A sound designed to bypass higher brain function, and strike directly at the lizard brain. The emergency alert system tone cut through the stale air of my living room at exactly 8:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was standing at the kitchen sink, scrubbing a stubborn lasagna stain off a Pyrex dish. My mind completely empty. The noise made me jump, sending a spray of soapy water onto my shirt. I sighed, dropping the sponge. "Alexa, mute," I barked, turning toward the living room. But the television didn't mute. The sound persisted, that jagged, two-tone electronic screech that feels like it's drilling into your molars. On the screen, the usual scheduled rerun of The Office had been replaced by a solid, unmoving wall of blue. No text scrolling at the bottom, no ticker tape, just that aggressive electric blue. I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked into the living room, annoyed. "Probably just a test," I muttered. They did these monthly tests all the time, usually at 3 a.m. when they thought nobody was watching. Doing it during prime time seemed like a bold choice for the FCC. The screeching cut out abruptly. The silence that followed was heavy, vacuum sealed. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. Then, the voice came. It wasn't the usual robotic text-to-speech voice, the one that sounds like a speak and spell with a cold. This voice was synthesized. Yes, but deeper, distorted, like it was being broadcast through a layer of water. "Civil danger warning," it droned. "This is not a test. The United States government has issued an immediate shelter-in-place order for the tri-state area. An anomalous visual threat has been reported." I frowned, the towel bunching in my hand. Visual threat. What the hell was a visual threat? "Citizens are instructed to immediately return to their homes," the voice continued, devoid of any panic or empathy. "Close all blinds. Lock all doors and windows. Move to an interior room without line of sight to the outdoors. If you see a motionless figure standing on your property, do not look." The words hung in the air, absurd and terrifying. I repeat, do not look. Do not acknowledge its presence. Do not attempt to communicate. Aversion of gaze is the only confirmed survival protocol. Stand by for further instructions. The screen flickered once, then went black. I stood there for a long moment, the remote control heavy in my hand. A prank. It had to be. Some hacker group had hijacked the local cable feed to scare everyone. It was almost Halloween after all. I let out a nervous chuckle, shaking my head. "Nice try," I whispered to the empty room. I turned back toward the kitchen to finish the dishes, but as I passed the sliding glass door that looked out onto my backyard, the motion sensor floodlight flickered on outside. In the center of the yard, the grass was bathed in harsh white light, and standing there perfectly still was a man. My brain did a funny thing in that moment. It tried to reject what my eyes were seeing. It tried to tell me that the figure standing in the center of my lawn was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the oak tree. Or maybe a neighbor who had wandered over to ask for sugar at the worst possible time. But shadows don't wear suits, and neighbors don't stand with their arms pinned rigidly to their sides. Staring straight ahead at nothing, I froze, one hand gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, so hard my knuckles turned white. The floodlight hummed, casting long, sharp shadows across the grass. The man was facing away from the house, looking toward the wooden fence that separated my property from the miller's. He was just standing there. If you see a motionless figure standing on your property, do not look. The warning from the television echoed in my head, cold and clinical. But the human instinct is a traitor. When someone tells you not to look, every nerve in your body screams to do the opposite. It's the same impulse that makes you slow down to gawk at a car crash. Curiosity is a disease, and in that moment I was infected. I felt a pull, a physical magnetic tug behind my eyes, urging me to focus on him, to squint, to see who he was, to tap on the glass and ask what the hell he was doing. Don't look. I forced my gaze to the floor. The linoleum tiles became the most interesting thing in the world. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, a frantic thump, thump, thump. that I could feel in my throat. "Okay," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Okay, Elias, just close the blinds." I shuffled sideways toward the sliding glass door, keeping my eyes aggressively averted. I looked at the wall. I looked at the fridge magnets. I looked at the handle of the blinds. But in my peripheral vision, that blurry, unreliable danger zone at the edge of sight, I could still see him. He hadn't moved. Not an inch. He wasn't breathing. His suit jacket didn't flutter in the evening breeze. He looked like a mannequin dropped into the middle of suburbia. I reached out, my fingers fumbling for the plastic wand to twist the vertical blinds shut. My hand shook so badly I knocked the wand against the glass. Clack, clack, clack. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. In my peripheral vision, the figure shifted. It wasn't a walk. It was a snap. One moment he was facing the fence. The next, his body had rotated 90 degrees. He was facing the house, facing me. A wave of nausea rolled through my gut. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt freezing, as if someone had opened the freezer door right next to me. The tug to look became violent, a screaming pressure in my temples. "Look at him. Just look at him. He wants you to see." "No," I gritted out. I grabbed the wand and twisted it violently. The slats of the blinds clattered shut, slicing the view of the backyard into ribbons, then blocking it out completely. I didn't stop there. I grabbed the drawstring and yanked the blackout curtains closed over the blinds, plunging the kitchen into dimness. I backed away, breathing hard, my back hitting the refrigerator. I was safe. The glass was covered. I couldn't see him anymore, but then, from the other side of the glass, came a sound, soft, deliberate. Tap, tap. He was on the porch. I practically sprinted out of the kitchen, abandoning the dirty dishes and the half-washed Pyrex. The hallway was my sanctuary. It was windowless, a narrow tunnel of drywall and family photos that felt, for the moment, like the safest place on earth. I collapsed against the wall, sliding down until I hit the floor. The tapping from the kitchen had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was worse. It was a heavy, expectant silence, like the pause before a thunderclap. My hand dove into my pocket and fished out my phone. The screen lit up my face in the dark hallway, blindingly bright. I squinted, my thumb hovering over the dialer. 911. That was a logical step. There was a trespasser, a threat. But before I could dial, a banner notification dropped down from the top of the screen. Then another. Then a dozen. Ding ding, ding. It was the neighborhood HOA group chat. Oak Creek Community Watch, usually reserved for passive-aggressive complaints about unkempt lawns or garbage cans left out too long. Tonight, it was a scrolling feed of panic. Karen Mim, did anyone else see the alert on television? Is this real, Dave? 404. Probably a hack. Some kid's messing around. Sarah J., my dog won't stop barking at the backyard. Hez losing his mind. Mrs. Higgins, Teresa Man and my azaleas. I stared at Mrs. Higgins' message. She lived 3 houses down, a sweet old widow who baked cinnamon rolls for Christmas. Dave 404, call the cops. Martha, don't go outside. Mrs. Higgins, Hez not moving. Hez just standing there, he looks familiar. I think it's Harold. Harold was Mrs. Higgins' husband. Harold had been dead for 6 years. A cold prickle of dread danced down my spine. Elias, me, do not look at him, Martha. The television said don't look. I hit send, my fingers trembling. Mrs. Higgins, Hez waving at me. Oh, Harold, he looked so cold. Then, a photo appeared in the chat. It was a low-quality, grainy image taken through a screen door. The flash had reflected off the glass, creating a white flare in the center. But beyond it, in the darkness of Mrs. Higgins' garden, you could see a shape. A gray, motionless figure standing among the flowers. As soon as the image loaded, a sharp, white-hot spike of pain stabbed behind my eyes. I gasped, dropping the phone. It clattered onto the hardwood floor. The pain was instant and blinding, like an ice pick to the frontal lobe. I squeezed my eyes shut, groaning, pressing the heels of my palms into my sockets. The rule wasn't just physical, it applied to digital images too. Just seeing a representation of them was enough to trigger whatever this was. When the pain subsided to a dull throb, I cautiously picked up the phone again, careful not to look directly at the photo. I scrolled past it quickly. Mrs. Higgins. I'm going to let him in. He doesn't have his keys. Day 404, Martha number Sarah J. Martha, please answer. Mrs. Higgins. Typing. The typing bubble bobbed for a long time. Then it disappeared. Mrs. Higgins didn't type anything else. But a new message popped up from the Millers next door. Tom Miller there in the street. Dozens of them. Don't look out the front windows. Oh God, they are all facing my house. My breath hitched. The front of the house. I had closed the back blinds, but the front living room, the giant bay window facing the street, was wide open, and the streetlights were on. I scrambled to my feet, the hallway spinning for a moment as the blood rushed back to my head. The living room, the massive, beautiful bay window that I had paid extra for when I bought the place, now felt like a gaping wound in the side of my fortress. I took a step toward the living room entrance, but before I could cross the threshold, the world vanished. Click. The humming of the refrigerator died. The soft whir of the HVAC fan cut out. The Wi-Fi router lights in the hallway blinked once and went dark. Power outage. The darkness was sudden and total. It was a suffocating, ink-black void that pressed against my eyeballs. The only light came from the faint, sickly yellow glow of the street lamps, filtering in through that accursed bay window in the other room. No, 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 I whispered, my voice sounding incredibly small in the dead house. This shifted everything. The terror wasn't just visual anymore. It was auditory. I was blind, navigating my own home by memory. While things I couldn't understand stood silently outside, I dropped to my hands and knees. If I stood up, I risked accidentally glancing out the window. If I crawled, I could keep below the sill line. It was humiliating, scuttling across my own floor like a cockroach. But dignity had gone out the window the moment Mrs. Higgins stopped typing. I crawled into the living room. The carpet was rough against my palms. The air was already starting to smell stale, losing the circulation of the AC. Through the vents, I could smell the outdoors a damp, metallic scent, like ozone and wet pavement. Rain was coming. I reached the wall below the bay window. I could feel the cold radiating off the glass above me. The street lamps outside cast long, distorted rectangles of light onto the ceiling. I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to look up at the reflection in the glass. I reached up blindly, fumbling for the heavy velvet drapes. My fingers brushed the fabric. I yanked them closed. The metal rings hissed along the rod, blotting out the yellow light from the street. Darkness again, absolute. I sat there for a moment, my back against the wall, listening. The house settled, wood creaked. The wind whistled softly in the chimney, and then I heard it again. Tap, tap. It wasn't at the kitchen door anymore. It was right above my head, on the bay window glass. I froze, holding my breath until my lungs burned. Tap, tap. It was rhythmic, gentle, polite. It sounded like a fingernail clicking against the pane. Then the sound moved. Scrape. A long, slow drag, like a ring being pulled across the glass. I followed the sound with my ears as it moved to the left, toward the dining room window, then further left, toward the guest bedroom. Something was circling the house, testing the perimeter, running its hands along the exterior walls, searching for a gap. I realized with a jolt of pure adrenaline that I hadn't checked the deadbolt on the front door. I usually locked it, but sometimes, if I was just bringing in groceries, I crawled faster now, scrambling over the hardwood toward the entryway. The tapping sound was picking up speed, moving parallel to me on the outside. Tap, 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 tap. It knew where I was. It could hear me moving inside. I reached the door. I pulled myself up, keeping my eyes squeezed shut, just in case there was a gap in the weather stripping. My hand found the cold metal of the lock. It was horizontal, unlocked. A whimper escaped my throat. I grabbed the latch and twisted it. Thunk. The deadbolt slid home. From the other side of the door, inches from my face, separated only by 2 inches of wood, the tapping stopped instantly. There was a pause, a silence so deep, it felt like the world had held its breath. Then, a voice, not robotic, not distorted. It sounded exactly like my neighbor, Tom Miller, Elias. the voice said from the other side of the door. "Open up, buddy. My key won't work." "It's cold out here." My blood ran cold. I knew Tom. I knew his voice. But Tom lived next door, and Tom had just been texting in the group chat about the things in the street. "Tom," I whispered, against my better judgment. "Yeah, it's me," the voice said. It was flat, monotone. "Just open the door. I need to show you something." "It's beautiful, Elias. You really need to look." "Go away," I hissed, pressing my forehead against the cool wood of the door. "I'm not opening it, Tom. Get back to your house. It's not safe in my house anymore." Tom's voice replied. It was chillingly calm, devoid of the frantic energy he had displayed in the group chat just minutes ago. "The windows are broken. Just open the door, Elias. Look at me, just for a second." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I retreated into the hallway, away from the entryway, away from that voice that sounded like Tom, but felt like something else. Suddenly a loud crash echoed from outside, from the direction of the Miller's house next door. It sounded like a piece of furniture being thrown through a window, then screaming. Real screaming, raw, guttural, terrified screaming. It was Tom. But wait, Tom was just outside my door, wasn't he? Confusion warred with terror. I looked toward the peephole. I knew the rule, do not look. But the screams were agonizing. It sounded like someone being torn apart. Curiosity is the devil on your shoulder. It whispered that maybe the thing at my door was gone, drawn away by the noise. Maybe I could help. Maybe I could just verify. I crept back to the door. I placed my hand on the brass housing of the peephole. I closed one eye and pressed the other to the glass. The view through the fisheye lens was distorted and dark, lit only by the Miller's porch light. My front porch was empty. The Tom, who had been whispering to me, was gone. But across the lawn, I saw the real Tom Miller. He had burst out of his front door, stumbling down his porch steps. He was wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, clutching a pump-action shotgun and shaking hands. He was screaming at something I couldn't see, something near his mailbox. "Get away," he shrieked, racking the slide of the shotgun. "SHK, get away from my family." He raised the gun, aiming it into the darkness. And then he froze. He didn't fire. He didn't run. He just stopped mid-step, his body going rigid as if an invisible switch had been flipped. The scream cut off in his throat with a wet, choking sound. Through the peephole, I watched in horror as Tom Miller lowered the shotgun slowly. Very slowly, the weapon slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the driveway. He stood there in the middle of his lawn, bathed in the sickly yellow porch light. And then he began to change. It wasn't a physical transformation. He didn't sprout claws or grow fur. It was his posture. His shoulders slumped unnaturally. His arms pinned themselves to his sides, rigid and straight, mimicking the stance of the figure I had seen in my own backyard. Slowly, agonizingly, Tom turned his head. He wasn't looking at the mailbox anymore. He was pivoting toward my house, toward my door, toward the peephole. Even through the distortion of the lens, I saw his face. His jaw had gone completely slack, hanging open in a silent, unnatural gape. His eyes were wide too wide. The lids were stretched back so far, I could see the white all around his irises. The corners of his eyes were tearing, little rips of pink skin where the eyelids had been forced beyond their limit. He wasn't blinking. He was staring directly into the peephole, as if he knew I was there, as if he could see my terrified eye pressing against the glass from across the street. A smile began to creep onto his face. Not a happy smile. A mimicry of a smile. Too wide, showing too many teeth. "Look," Tom mouthed. I slammed my hand over the peephole and threw myself backward, crashing onto the floor. I scrambled away on my heels, kicking at the rug, hyperventilating. He saw me, I gasped to the empty, dark house. Oh God, he saw me seeing him. From outside, the screaming had stopped completely. The night was silent again, except for a new sound, thump. Thump, thump. Heavy footsteps coming up my driveway, not one person, many. The group chat hadn't lied. The Millers weren't the only ones out there. The whole neighborhood was waking up. and they were all coming here. I fled to the basement. It was the only tactical choice left. The ground floor was compromised, too many windows, too many points of entry. And now, a small army of converted neighbors gathering on my lawn. I slammed the basement door behind me and threw the heavy slide bolt. The stairs were steep and narrow, plunging down into cool, damp darkness. I stumbled down them, guided only by the screen of my phone, which I had dimmed to the lowest setting. The basement was unfinished concrete floors, exposed insulation, stacks of cardboard boxes filled with Christmas decorations and old college textbooks. It smelled of mildew and dust, but most importantly, it had very few windows, just two small. Rectangular hopper windows sat high in the foundation wall, barely at ground level. I didn't take any chances. I ripped open a box of old textbooks, tearing the cardboard flaps free. I grabbed a roll of duct tape from my tool bench and frantically taped the cardboard over the glass. Layer after layer, until not a single photon of moonlight could penetrate. Then, I retreated to the far corner, behind the furnace, curling into a ball on the cold concrete. Safe, I whispered, rocking back and forth. I'm safe down here, they can't see me. I sat there for what felt like hours, listening to the house settle above me. Every creak of the floorboards upstairs sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like a hand, trying the door handle, and then the HVAC vent above my head rattled. Clank. It was a metallic sound, echoing through the aluminum ductwork. Elias. The voice was soft, trembling. I froze. My breath hitched in my chest. Elias, are you down there? It was my mother who lived in a retirement community in Florida, 3 states and 1,000 miles away. My mother who had trouble walking to the mailbox, let alone traveling cross-country in the middle of an apocalypse. Mom, the word slipped out before I could stop it. Oh, thank God, the voice sobbed through the grate. The acoustics of the metal vent gave it a tinny, hollow quality, but the cadence was perfect. The slight rasp in her voice, the specific way she pronounced my name, Elias. Honey, please, let me in. It's so cold out here. You're in Florida, I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. You're not here. I flew in to surprise you, the voice said, sounding hurt. For your birthday, I took a cab, but then the sirens started. And the man, Elias, the man is looking at me. My birthday wasn't for 6 months. I knew it was a lie. I knew it was a trick. The entities, whatever they were, had accessed my memories. They were mining my guilt. Elias, please. Her voice rose to a panicked shriek, his walking toward me. He has no face, open the door. Why won't you open the door? It's not real, I chanted, covering my ears. It's not real. It's not real. I'm your mother, the voice screamed, losing its human warmth, becoming jagged and sharp. I changed your diapers, I fed you. Don't you love me? Open the door or I'll die right here. Then came the sounds of a struggle, wet tearing noises, a gurgling choke. Elias, help me. I sobbed into my knees, biting my arm to keep from screaming back. It was a performance, a cruel sadistic radio play, designed to break my will. The gurgling stopped abruptly. Silence returned to the vent. Then, a new sound drifted down through the metal shaft. A low, guttural chuckle, deep and resonant. His crying, the voice said. But it wasn't my mother anymore. It was the deep, distorted voice from the ES broadcast. The little boy is crying in the dark. Then, a sharp scrape like a fingernail dragging down the length of the vent, moving from the outside toward the inside. They weren't just outside anymore, they were in the vents. I sat in the dark for what felt like an eternity. But my watch said it had only been 40 minutes since the voice in the vent fell silent. The silence was heavy. It felt like the air pressure in the basement had dropped, making my ears pop. I needed to think. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. I pulled a small crumpled notebook and a pen from my pocket habitual carry items. For my job as a claims adjuster, I clicked the pen, the sound loud in the stillness, and clicked on my phone's flashlight, keeping it pointed strictly at the paper to avoid illuminating the room. I began to write, trying to organize the chaos into logic. 1. Threat is visual. Don't look. 2. Threat mimics voices. People. 3. Threat causes physical conversion. Tom, 4. Containment. Indoors. No line of sight. I stared at the list. It seemed simple. Follow the rules, survive the night. But something was nagging at me. A splinter in my mind. I thought back to the emergency alert broadcast. I replayed the specific wording in my head. If you see a motionless figure standing on your property, do not look. On your property, not outside. Not in the yard. On your property, property lines are legal concepts, not physical barriers. But what if the entity's definition of property wasn't about fences and deeds? What if property meant territory? And then a colder, more terrifying thought hit me. Why did they tell us to lock the doors? If looking is the trigger, then physical barriers shouldn't matter unless the entities can physically enter. But if they can physically enter, why haven't they broken the windows yet? I heard Tom throw furniture, but I hadn't heard glass breaking in my own house. They were waiting. The voice in the vent, the scraping sound. I realized with a jolt that I had assumed the scraping was coming from outside the vent. But the vents connect the entire house. If something could liquefy, or shift, or just exist in the dark. My hand froze over the notebook. I slowly, very slowly, lifted the beam of my phone flashlight from the page. I didn't shine it around the room. I just let the ambient spill of the light illuminate the floor in front of me. In the corner of the basement, near the sump pump, the shadows were deep. Too deep. The darkness there wasn't just an absence of light. It had mass. It had shape. I squinted, trying to make sense of the silhouette against the concrete wall. It looked like a stack of boxes I had forgotten. But boxes don't have shoulders. Boxes don't stand perfectly still, arms pinned to their sides, facing the corner of the room like a punished child. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was tall, taller than the ceiling should allow, its neck bent at a sickening angle to fit under the floor joists. It was wearing a suit. A gray, nondescript suit. It was inside. It had been inside the whole time. Or maybe it had come down the chimney, or through the vents. It didn't matter how, the rule said. If you see a motionless figure, do not look. I was looking. Not at its face, it was facing the wall, but I was looking at it. I snapped the flashlight off instantly. The basement plunged back into total blackness. But now I knew. I wasn't alone in the dark. I was sharing a 20x20 concrete box with one of them, and I had just turned off the lights. Terror is cold. That's what they don't tell you in movies. It's not a rush of heat. It's an ice bath. My blood felt like slush in my veins. My heart rate dropped to a painful, erratic thudding, as if my body was trying to play dead. It's in the corner. It's in the corner. I squeezed my eyes shut so tight that stars exploded in the blackness behind my lids. Don't look. Don't acknowledge. If I couldn't see it, was it really there? Quantum mechanics for the terrified. If I didn't observe the monster, did the monster exist? But I could hear it. It wasn't silent anymore. Now that the lights were out, the entity in the corner began to breathe. It was a wet, rattling sound, like air being sucked through a crushed windpipe. H-H-R-R triple-A. H-H-triple-A. It sounded like a death rattle on the loop. I had to move. I couldn't stay behind the furnace. If it turned around, if it decided to stop staring at the corner and start staring at me, I was trapped. I needed a weapon. My toolbox was on the workbench. The workbench was on the opposite wall. To get there, I would have to crawl past the corner. Past him, I opened my eyes. The darkness was absolute, but my mind painted the figure in vivid detail, glowing like a neon sign in my imagination. I began to crawl. My hands slid over the cold concrete. My knees scraped against the grit. I moved inches at a time, timing my movements with the rhythm of the entity's breathing. H, triple-A, triple-A. Slide forward. H, A, triple-A. Pause. I drew parallel to the sump pump. The air temperature dropped 10 degrees instantly. It was a localized pocket of freezing cold, radiating off the thing like dry ice. The smell hit me then, not the metallic ozone smell from outside, but something older. Rotting lilies, stagnant water, The smell of a funeral home that had flooded. I gagged, clapping a hand over my mouth. The breathing stopped. I froze. My entire body went rigid. Silence. Had it heard me? Was it turning? Was that neck uncoiling, snapping back into place so it could look down at me in the dark? I felt a pressure on the top of my head. Not a touch, just a presence. Like when someone stands directly behind you and you can feel their body heat, except this was a void of cold. Look up, a voice whispered in my mind. It wasn't the mimic voice. It was my own internal monologue, hijacked. Just look up, see what face it's wearing. Maybe it's dead, maybe it's you. No, I whimpered soundlessly, tears leaking from my squeezed-shut eyes. I lunged forward, scrambling on all fours like a panicked animal. I hit the workbench hard, bruising my shoulder. My hand swept across the surface, knocking over a jar of screws. Clatter, clatter, clatter. I didn't care about noise anymore. I grabbed blindly. My fingers closed around the cold, rubberized handle of a hammer. I spun around, putting my back to the workbench, holding the hammer out into the darkness like a talisman. Don't come closer, I croaked. Silence. Then, the breathing started again. But it wasn't coming from the corner anymore. HRAAA. It was coming from right in front of my face. The breath hit my face. It smelled like wet earth and ancient dust. I recoiled, swinging the hammer wildly into the blackness. Whoosh! It hit nothing but air. I swung again. Nothing. I was fighting a ghost, a phantom. And then, a sound shattered the standoff. Beep, beep, beep. It wasn't the ease tone. It was sharper, tinier. It was coming from the shelf above my head, my emergency weather radio. The battery-operated brick I bought 3 years ago and never used. The red LED strobe light on the radio flashed, cutting through the darkness in strobe light bursts. Flash. Darkness flash. Darkness in the flashes. I saw the basement. Flash. The corner was empty. Flash. The space in front of me was empty. The figure was gone. I scrambled up, grabbing the radio. The robotic voice was gone, replaced by a human voice, a man. He sounded breathless, hysterical, speaking too fast, tripping over his words. Repeat. Ignore previous directive. Protocol shift. Protocol shift. Do not close your eyes. I repeat, do not close your eyes. My heart stuttered. The first rule had been aversion. Don't look now. The entities have adapted, the voice screamed, the signal crackling with static. Closing your eyes allows for cerebral entry. They manifest in the blind spot. You have to keep visual contact, but do not stare fixedly. You have to blink. Rapid blinking disrupts their lock. Keep blinking. Don't let them stabilize. The logic was twisting, breaking. First, looking was death. Now, not looking was death. Was this broadcast real? Or was it them trying to trick me into opening my eyes? The man on the radio yelled, "They only move when you aren't observing the quantum state. Keep blinking. If you close your eyes for more than 3 seconds, they move. They get closer." Oh God, it's in the studio blinked. Everyone blink, crack. The transmission cut to dead air. I stood there in the pulsing red light of the weather radio. The hammer heavy in my hand. Flash. Empty basement. Darkness. 3 seconds. Flash. The figure was back. It wasn't in the corner. It wasn't in front of me. It was standing at the bottom of the stairs, blocking the exit. It was facing me now. I couldn't see its face, the red strobe washed out the details, but I saw the posture. Aggressive, leaning forward. It had moved while the light was off. I widened my eyes, staring at it, my lids burning. Blink, the radio said. Blink rapidly. I fluttered my eyelids. Flash, blink, flash, blink. The figure stayed still, a statue in a cheap suit. But the moment the red light died between pulses, I heard the fabric of its suit rustle, rustle, step. It was getting closer. I couldn't stay in the basement. It was a trap, a dead end. If the battery on the weather radio died, I would be plunged into permanent darkness. And that thing, that statue, would close the distance in seconds. I had to move. I had to get to the car. I timed my movements to the strobe light. Flash. I took a step. Darkness. I froze. Flash. The figure at the bottom of the stairs hadn't moved. I blinked rapidly, my eyelashes fluttering like hummingbird wings. "Excuse me," I whispered insanely to the thing blocking my path. I raised the hammer flash. I lunged. I didn't swing at it. I swung at the wooden banister next to it, vaulting myself over the railing and onto the stairs, bypassing the figure entirely. Darkness. A cold hand brushed my ankle. I screamed, kicking backward. My boot connected with something hard like stone or dense marble. Flash. I was halfway up the stairs. The figure was now standing on the first step, its head twisted around 180 degrees to watch me climb. Its face was a smooth, featureless oval of gray flesh. No eyes, no mouth, just a blank slate waiting to be written on. I scrambled up the rest of the steps, bursting through the basement door and slamming it shut. I didn't bother with the bolt. It wouldn't hold a ghost. The ground floor was bathed in moonlight. The storm clouds must have broken. Beams of silver light cut through the gaps in the curtains I had so carefully closed earlier. But the hallway wasn't empty. They were inside, 3 of them, standing in the living room like art installation pieces. One by the television, one by the couch, one standing directly in the center of the rug. They were all different heights, different builds, but they all wore the same gray, nondescript clothing, and they were all frozen mid-stride. The one in the center was reaching for the remote control I had left on the coffee table. The one by the television was leaning forward as if inspecting the screen. "Don't close your eyes, Blink." I blinked furiously. Flash, flash, flash. They didn't move. But the smell. The air in the living room was thick with ozone and the stench of singed hair. It tasted like licking a 9-volt battery. The static electricity was so high the hair on my arm stood straight up. My car keys were in the kitchen, on the hook by the fridge. To get there, I had to walk past them. I took a step into the living room. My floorboards creaked. Click! The sound came from the statue by the couch. It hadn't moved, but a joint in its neck had popped. I kept my eyes locked on them, blinking, tearing up from the strain. I sidestepped along the wall. Blink. The one in the center, its arm was lower now. It wasn't reaching for the remote. It was reaching toward me. Blink. The one by the television had rotated its torso. They were moving in the microseconds that my eyelids were closed. They were incredibly fast. "Stay back," I warned, my voice shaking. I reached the kitchen archway. I risked a glance toward the key hook. There was another one in the kitchen. This one wasn't a stranger. It was wearing a floral dress. It was short. It had curly gray hair. Mrs. Higgins. She was standing in front of the fridge, her hand frozen halfway to the handle. Her face was still Mrs. Higgins' kind, wrinkled, but her eyes were gone, replaced by smooth, gray skin. My keys were right behind her head. I had to reach past her. I stepped into the kitchen. The moonlight reflecting off the linoleum was blinding. Blink. Mrs. Higgins' mouth opened. Wider blink, wider, like a snake unhinging its jaw. I lunged, my hand darting out. I felt the cold, clammy skin of her cheek brush my wrist. I grabbed the keys. Blink. Her hand clamped around my forearm. It wasn't a grip of flesh. It was a vice of iron cold. Unyielding stone. I screamed and yanked my arm back. The fabric of my shirt tore, her fingernails now sharp. Gray claws raked furrows down my skin. I stumbled backward, falling into the hallway, clutching the keys to my chest. Mrs. Higgins didn't chase me. She just stood there, one arm extended, her jaw hanging open to her chest. A silent statue of a grandmother guarding the refrigerator. I turned and ran for the front door. I hit the front door hard, my shoulder slamming into the wood as I fumbled with the deadbolt. My fingers were slick with sweat and blood from the scratch on my arm. Click, the lock disengaged. I threw the door open and burst out into the night. The cool air hit me like a slap. The storm had passed, leaving the pavement slick and black, reflecting the full moon above. But I stopped dead on the porch. The neighborhood wasn't the neighborhood anymore. It was a gallery. Every lawn, every driveway, every sidewalk was populated. Figures stood everywhere. Some were alone, standing in the center of manicured grass. Others were in clusters. 3 or 4 of them gathered around a mailbox or a parked car. They were all frozen, perfectly still, and they were all looking at me. Hundreds of featureless, gray faces turned toward my porch. Blink. I saw a ripple move through the crowd, a collective shift, like wind moving through a wheat field. They all took one synchronized step forward. "Oh God," I whimpered. My car, a silver sedan, was parked in the driveway, maybe 20 feet away. Between me and the car stood 3 of them. One was a child, a little girl in pajamas, holding a teddy bear, except the bear was gray stone fused to her hand. I gripped my keys like a weapon. "Don't stare fixedly. Keep blinking." I ran. I leaped off the porch steps, my boots hitting the wet concrete. Blink. The crowd surged. They didn't run. They glitched. In the split second, my eyes were closed. They teleported forward. The 3 in the driveway were suddenly 5 feet closer. I swerved, dodging the little girl. I felt the cold radiation coming off her, a wave of absolute zero. Blink. A hand brushed my shoulder. I spun around, swinging the hammer I still clutched in my left hand. Crack. The hammer connected with the head of a tall figure in a business suit. It didn't feel like hitting flesh. It felt like hitting hollow ceramic. The figure's head shattered. No blood. No brain matter. Just dust gray. Powdery dust puffed out into the air, choking me. The figure didn't fall. It just stood there, headless, its arms still reaching for me. I coughed, stumbling. I was 10 feet from the car. Blink. I tripped. My toe caught on a crack in the driveway. I went down hard, skinning my palms on the asphalt. The keys flew out of my hand, skittering across the pavement. They landed under the car. I scrambled up to my knees. The crowd was closing in. They were a wall of gray now, a silent circle tightening the noose. I looked at the car. I looked at the gap beneath the chassis I dove. I slid on my stomach across the wet driveway, reaching under the car. My fingers brushed the cool plastic of the key fob. Something grabbed my ankle. I looked back. It was Mrs. Higgins. She had followed me out. She was crawling on the driveway, moving like a spider, her limbs bent at impossible angles. Her jaw was dragging on the asphalt. She had my leg. I kicked, screaming, driving the heel of my boot into her face. Crunch. Her jaw snapped off. She didn't make a sound. She just held on. I grabbed the keys. I rolled onto my back and kicked with both legs, finally breaking her grip. I scrambled up, yanked the car door open, and threw myself into the driver's seat. I slammed the door shut just as a dozen gray hands slammed against the glass. Thud, thud, thud. Thud they pressed against the windows, blotting out the moon. A sea of blank faces pressing against the glass, trying to see inside. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a guttural growl that vibrated through the frame of the car. The heater kicked on, blasting warm air into the cab, chasing away the graveyard chill of the entities outside. For a split second, I felt a rush of euphoria. The car was a fortress. Steel, glass, locks. It was a bubble of normality in a world gone mad. The dashboard lights illuminated the cabin in the soft, reassuring green. The radio display flickered on, defaulting to the last station I had listened to classic rock. Hotel California began to play softly, the guitar solo weaving through the muffled thuds of the creatures beating on the glass. "I made it," I whispered, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I actually made it. I looked out the side window. Mrs. Higgins was pressing her face against the glass, her broken jaw hanging loose. But she couldn't get in. The glass held. I shifted the car into reverse. The backup camera screen on the dashboard lit up. The view on the screen was grainy and wide angle. It showed the driveway behind me. It showed the crowd of gray figures parting slightly as the reverse lights flared on. But it also showed something else. Standing directly behind my car, illuminated in the harsh red glow of the taillights, was a figure that was different from the others. It wasn't gray. It wasn't wearing human clothes. It was Vantablack. A void in the shape of a man, it absorbed the light around it, creating a silhouette that looked like a tear in reality. It was taller than the garage door, thin, elongated. And it was looking at the camera. I didn't need to see its face to know it was looking. I felt the weight of its gaze pressing through the lens, through the wiring, through the screen, and into my skull. The prime entity. The source. My head split with pain. Not the migraine from before this was worse. This felt like my brain was physically expanding, pushing against the bone. Don't look. I tore my eyes away from the backup camera. I looked forward, through the windshield. The gray figures were clearing a path. They were stepping aside, bowing their heads, making way. In front of the car, the garage door began to rattle. Not from the wind, the metal tracks shrieked. The aluminum panels buckled inward. Boom. Something was in the garage. The prime entity wasn't just behind me. It was in front of me. It was everywhere. I panicked. I slammed my foot on the gas, but the car was still in reverse. The tires squealed against the wet asphalt. The car shot backward, crunch. I hit the figure in the backup camera, but there was no impact, no resistance. The car passed right through it like it was made of smoke. I spun the wheel, swinging the front end around, clipping Mrs. Higgins and sending her tumbling into the azaleas. I shifted into drive and floored it. The headlights swept across the yard, illuminating the garage door one last time. It had been torn open from the inside, and standing in the wreckage of my tools and holiday decorations was me, a gray, stone statue of myself, wearing the clothes I had on right now, holding a hammer, screaming. I screamed back at it as I tore down the driveway and onto the street. I drove like a madman. I blew through the stop sign at the end of my street, the tires screeching as I swerved onto the main road. The speedometer climbed 40, 60, 80. The world outside my windows was a blur of motion and horror. The suburbs were burning, not with fire but with chaos. Cars were smashed into telephone poles, their hazards blinking rhythmically. Front doors hung open. The streets were littered with debris, bicycles, lawn chairs, bodies. But the bodies weren't lying down, they were standing. Hundreds of them on the medians, in the ditches, standing on the roofs of cars. They were all facing the road, watching me pass. I turned on the radio, desperate for a voice, for instructions, for anything. Static. I scanned the dial. Buzz. Click. Then, on 98.5 FM, a sound. It wasn't a voice. It was a low, throbbing hum. Vivivum. Vivivum. It vibrated in my teeth. It matched the rhythm of the headache that was still pounding behind my eyes. I switched to AM. Same hum. I switched to satellite. Same hum. It wasn't a broadcast. It was the background noise of the universe now. I looked in the rearview mirror to check if I was being followed. The back seat was empty, but in the reflection of the glass, I saw him sitting in the passenger seat. I swerved, nearly putting the car into the ditch. I looked at the passenger seat. Empty. Just my gym bag and a fast food wrapper. I looked back at the mirror. He was there. The man in the gray suit. He was sitting calmly, hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead through the windshield. "You're not real," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You're a hallucination, stress response." A breakdown. The reflection in the mirror turned its head. It looked at me, and then it spoke. Not with sound, but with thought. The words blossomed in my mind like ink in water. "We are not the invasion, Elias." I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The road ahead was endless, a tunnel of headlights and darkness. We are the frequency. I realized then why the doors didn't stop them. Why the walls didn't matter. Why closing my eyes only changed the rules. They weren't physical beings invading a physical space. They were a signal, a visual virus. Once you saw them, once you acknowledged them, you downloaded them. The statues outside. The neighbors, they were just the hardware. The empty shells left behind once the software took over. "Get out of my head," I screamed, slamming my hand against the dashboard. The reflection smiled. "You were almost finished downloading." I looked ahead. The road was ending. The highway barriers were smashed. Beyond them lay the cornfields. Endless, swaying stalks of corn under the moonlight, and standing in the corn, waiting for me, was a figure the size of a skyscraper. I didn't brake. There was no point. The car smashed through the guardrail, metal shrieking against metal. We went airborne for a terrifying, weightless second before crashing down into the soft earth of the cornfield. The airbag deployed a punch to the face that filled the cabin with white powder and the smell of chemicals. I coughed, hacking, pushing the deflated bag away. My nose was bleeding. My head was ringing. I kicked the door open and crawled out into the dirt. The corn towered over me, rustling in the wind. Shh. It sounded like whispering. I stood up, swaying on unsteady legs. I was surrounded. They were in the rows. Gray figures. Thousands of them. As far as the eye could see, a silent, standing army of the converted. They weren't attacking. They were just watching. I looked up at the sky. The moon wasn't a moon anymore. It had opened. The cratered surface had peeled back like an eyelid, revealing a massive, wet, unblinking pupil underneath. The sky was an eye, and it was looking down at us, at me. The hum in my head reached a crescendo. It was a choir now, a billion voices singing one note. I realized then the futility of the rules. Don't look. Don't close your eyes, blink. They were just games, tests. Ways to filter the weak from the strong. The signal wanted a host that could survive the transmission. I looked at the reflection in the rearview mirror of my wrecked car one last time. The passenger seat was still empty, but the driver's seat, the reflection wasn't me anymore. It was him, the gray man. He raised a hand and waved. I felt my own hand raise. I wasn't controlling it. My jaw went slack. My eyes widened, stretching, tearing at the corners. The pain was gone. The fear was gone. There was only the signal. I turned to the nearest cornstalk. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound that came out wasn't a scream. It was the tone, the emergency alert system. I was the siren now. This broadcast is repeating. If you are hearing this, you are the resistance. Tell me in the comments what color was the sky when you saw him. Subscribe to the frequency before it's too late.